All right, we are going to be learning how to make this sci-fi looking environment thing. Um, Lots of geometry nodes, really, but nothing complicated. It's just a lot of repeating processes in a sense to get different looks and different effects. Randomization is really the name of the game for this one. So almost everything we're doing. Sorry, I'm moving the mic. Almost everything we're doing is an attempt to create some type of randomization from the noise texture here to this liquid thing to the floor here to this. Just creating this greebled looking Borg kind of vibe. So yeah, with that being said, you can grab this exact project file already here on Patreon, but I'm going to scoot this over to my other screen and we are going to start up a new file and we're going to get going. So as long as you have a geometry nodes capable version of Blender, you're good. I'm using 3.4.1. It's probably optimal to have the version I'm using, and I believe that's the current one. So what I always do when I start out my geometry nodes scenes is I just go ahead and throw a plane in there just to get something started that we can hop over to geometry nodes, crush that window and click new. So let's go ahead and design the floor first. So let's go and get our assets. And in this case, we're not going to build the objects in geometry nodes. We're just going to we're going to almost arrange the objects in geometry nodes. But being that GeoNodes has some limitations, we have to build them out here. So I'm going to move that there. And we're going to go ahead and get a bevel modifier. Really don't want it to be too much. Probably that's fine. And then you can go ahead and make it as sharp or as round as you want it to be. And we also need to get a cylinder right here. I'm gonna hit the period key to go look at it. The vertices there is probably fine because they're gonna be so small. Lower poly you can get away with. What I'm gonna do now is make it very tall. Perfect. And radius is fine. So now I'm just gonna hit G and move it over here and hit period to bring it. And then I want to go ahead and do two things. So I'm going to hit the tilde key. It's right above the tab key. I'm going to hit front. Actually, just go to layout. There we go. So we can see the whole thing. First thing I want to do is get my anchor point to be at the very bottom here. And we need to do that with this guy as well. The reason why is when we instance it's on the plane, wherever the anchor point is, that's where the plane is going to be. So you would essentially, when you instance this across your floor, when you instance this on the floor is going to cut it in half. So essentially the anchor point is your floor point. So I'm gonna click here and then just bring it up. Now make sure you are in edit mode, and that's gonna be how you can do that. I'm gonna hit G and move it down. So we're gonna do the same thing with the cube. Just bring that anchor point there. And it's okay to eyeball that. It does not need to be perfect. We'll go back to geometry nodes. I'm gonna click on the plane, hit period key so we can kind of see what we're doing here. All right. So now that we have this plane here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete the group input, Shift A, search grid, which is essentially we're just throwing another plane in there. But in this case, it's a GeoNodes plane. I'm going to scale it by 15 here. It's a geometry nodes plane so that we can have some fun there. So I'm going to go ahead and subdivide it, considerably, something like that. And, we don't have to worry about getting it perfect because it's GeoNodes, it's changeable at any point in time. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get a distribute points on faces. We're going to do a distribute points on faces, and typically you do like a instance on points, but that creates this obvious grid when using this random, it'll just randomly throw points everywhere. Which again, like I mentioned, we are just doing our best to replicate randomization here. We're gonna go ahead and Shift A and get a join geometry, and then throw that into here. It's almost like your mix node, and that's gonna bring your floor back, which is what we're wanting. Now we're gonna get a separate geometry. Well, actually, let's bring this density up so I can represent what that separate geometry is going to do. So we'll get a SEP separate geometry, throw that there. We're going to click face, and then we're going to get a random value set to Boolean, so we just get one slider, put that into the selection, and now you do have some control over the amount of surface area that's getting thrown things onto. Now we have all these points. We can instance on points. I'm going to do that here. Now this is just for me, organization-wise, but I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift and right-click and just move that out of the way. So, because we're never going to, that's just going to stay there. So now we need to get our instance object, which is going to be the cube that we use. So let's click back on the plane and just drag it from the outliner and throw it into the instance. And then bring your scale down. Now we have this discombobulated mess. But what I'm going to do is get another random value, and we're going to keep it at float, plug it into scale, and then bring your max down. And now we have random size that easily. And then you can, change your seed. So now we have random size, very, very quick, very fast. Now we need to go ahead and get that cylinder. But I forgot to do something with the cylinder. So I'm going to hit the period key and go back to the cylinder. I'm going to hit tab, go right here to the edge select. I'm going to hold down shift and double click here so that we select that. I'm hit Control A and apply scale just in case I forgot. And we're going to go ahead and bevel this top portion. I'm using the scroll wheel to select those bevels. And shade smooth. All right, now we're back. So let's go ahead and throw those instances on this plane. So we're going to essentially repeat the process we just did to build the stuff for the cubes. So I'm going to bring this down. So I'm going to get a separate geometry, distribute points on faces, hit Shift and bring that down. This grid, plug that into geometry. And then we have this join geometry, so we'll plug that here. So now we have a bunch of points everywhere. And then random value, hit Shift E and plug that into the selection. And then I'm going to hit that seed and then bring my probability down. I don't want quite as many of those cylinders as I do the cubes. They're just kind of these really interesting points of reference. All right, now that we have that instance on points, I'm going to hit Shift D and do that. And then again, bring that cylinder from the outliner. Plug geometry into instance. Now we have this. And I'll bring the density down. And I bring my probability up higher now that my density is down. All right. We have our floor. We're done. Let's go ahead and shade it. So I'm going to go to Material Preview. And each line represents an object. So this first line right here represents this just flat plane. Second line represents the cube. Third line represents the cylinders. So what I'm going to do is get in a set material. The reason I told you that is because if you want to give each object its own individual material, you would put the set material on each one, and that'll isolate it. But I'm going to just put the same material on everything because the scene is relatively optimized. So I'm just going to throw it there. And right over here, we're going to click New. And we're going to make it a metallic. I'm going to do it right here in the middle in the color. And then select that. We're going to call it main metal. I know that's not the right way to spell it. That's just the first thing that came to mind. All right. Let's go ahead and edit that material very quickly. Nothing crazy. So we're going to go here to shading. And it's going to bring up that material. All I want to do is mess with the roughness. So we're going to Shift A and get a color ramp. Get a noise texture. And if you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, just go ahead and enable it in your preferences. Get the Node Wrangler going, and then select the noise texture, hit Control T, object coordinate, and you can hear my cat running around the background. Click the factor. Now we have this. So let's go ahead and bring the scale to 1, detail to 12, bring your roughness up. And then on the black portion, bring it up so it's not so shiny. All right, we have created our material. We'll do it 0.8. Very cool. That's our floor. So we've tackled the floor portion. And there we have it. I did neglect to mention this is part 1 of 2 parts. Part 1, we're just building the scene. Part 2, we're lighting it and shading it. So I guess I kind of jumped the gun on that. But that's okay. Now, let's go ahead and model the cube that's going to go here in the middle. So I'm going to hit Shift-A and get a cube. And I guess that's a good size to start with. So we're going to leave it. I'm going to bring it over here so that we can actually model it really quick. So here we are, have our cube, and we're going to do some Boolean fun. And this may or may not be the proper way to do it. So I'm going to hit Shift-A and then scale it down. Again, this may or may not be the proper way to Boolean this particular shape, but I'm much better with generative art like this floor than I am with like poly modeling. So this is just my solution to the problem. So I'm going to click on the scale here and scale it out. I'm going to hit Control A to apply that scale. And then I'm going to hit Shift D and I'm going to hit RX90, Shift D, and then RY90. And then I'm going to select all 3 of these new objects and hit Control J. And what that's going to do is just make them one mesh, which we're going to use as our Boolean object. So click on this guy, go to the modifiers, and add in a Boolean, and then select this object. And then I'm going to click this object and hit H. And then I think intersect, union, difference. So we're going to click on difference here under solver objects, do self-intersection, and that creates our object. And then right over here, I'm going to hit Shift A, and that's going to apply it. Now we're done. This is our new object. And then we are going to be instancing some things on this. And so I'd like to have some geometry. So we're going to remesh it. So we're going to take this add modifier and we're going to go ahead and get our remesh right here. And then we're actually going to use blocks, which just is absolutely perfect for this instance. It just nails that subdivision. And I'm going to bring it up to 5. And now we have a nicely subdivided object. All right, now let's go ahead and bring it back. So I'm gonna hit the tilde key and go to the top. Bring it back here. All right, cool. And honestly, let's make it a little bit bigger. Like that, perfect. Now let's make the liquid that's gonna go on the inside of this thing. So let's get a plane and convenience right there in the middle. Perfect. So let's go back to geometry nodes and we're going to use one of my favorite things to just goof around in Blender is the volume cube. So I'm going to click new, hit the period key. Where's my nodes? There we go. Hitting the period key zooms in things that you have selected. So I'm going to delete that and we're going to get a volume cube. Plug that into geometry, and I'm going to bring it up. So now it's just going to be in the middle. So now we have volume. Now we need a volume to mesh. That's going to create essentially a beveled cube. But here's what's really cool. You have a density slider here. So what you can do is get a color ramp. Plug that into the density and get a noise texture. And then bring it down, and now you can goof with the density. And so for my scale, I brought to a scale of 1. And then here on the resolution, we're going to give it a resolution of 90. We're going to get a set shade smooth node, so now it's going to be nice and smooth. And then say, hey, I don't like that shape. Well, we always have 4D. you can now go in and select the shape that works best for your scene. And really, we're going to select the shape once we get into the lighting portion, because that's really what's the shape of this is largely affected by the lighting. That's the way it's going to bounce around and bounce in and make it readable and cool. So let's just leave that here for now. And then let's get one more thing, which is another cube. I'm gonna hit the tilde key and go to the front. I hope I'm saying tilde right. Maybe it's tilde. Who cares? All right. So I'm gonna hit Control A and apply scale, right click and subdivide. And that's all we're gonna need for that. And then let's just go ahead and throw a wireframe on it. So now this thing is in a bit of a cage, which is really cool and really fun. All right, the last thing for this particular part of the tutorial is creating the greebles on this guy. So staying in geometry nodes, we're going to do a similar thing here. So what I'm going to do here is type in points and generate points on faces, distribute points on faces. There it is. Sometimes I forget. And then we're going to get our join geometry to bring everything back. There we go. Cool. So now we have that. And let's use that same cube we made over here, which is the first cube. I was trying to remember which one it was. So drag it in. So inst, we'll do instance on points, or instance on points. Plug it there. Use our geometry to plug it into instance. Now we have all this craziness. That's how it's going to look right now. But we want it to be random. So same exact process. We're going to get a random value. Plug that into scale and then bring the max down until you like what you're seeing. And then you can bring up your density for more or less. There it is. That is the bones of what we've created. That's how it's done. The modeling portion. So this is part one. We're going to go next to part two, which is going to be lighting, shading, and rendering, which is going to be fun and exciting. It's probably my favorite part. So see you there.